The NBA playoffs are here, and you can turn crossovers into cash with FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/Blue Wire right now and place a $5 bet, and you'll get an instant $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel always has great promotions every single day. It's a safe and secure app, and you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Just go to FanDuel.com/Blue Wire and sign up to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet your first $5. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Hope is here. GamblingHelplineMA.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts. Call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. That's 467-369 in New York. 21 or older and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino, LLC. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, Virginia. 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342, Arizona. 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat, Connecticut. 1-800-9-WITH-IT, Indiana. 1-800-522-4700 or visit ksgamblinghelp.com, Kansas. 1-877-770-STOP, Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. 1-800-522-4700, Wyoming, or visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net, West Virginia.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring an in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod. We're here to discuss Michigan State basketball as always, and of course the offseason, so we're going to be talking a little bit about rosters and recruiting. Before we begin, I just want to remind you that if you've not yet subscribed to the show, please head on over to your podcast player, select subscribe, make sure you don't miss any episodes. You can also sign up for our newsletter, which I shouldn't even say newsletter, occasional emails with announcements of things going on with our show, or maybe we have a call for questions or a contest. You can do that just by going to our website at tffinots.com. Again, if you do want to support the show, we greatly appreciate it. If you have a little bit of guilt, you're like, boy, listen to the show. You guys put out great content. You know, for just like $1 a week, you can do a Patreon. You can also, at the Scott Skiles level, you can do twice that. At the Draymond Green level, and Mateen Cleaves will get you some gear. And so we greatly appreciate it. It helps keep the show going and cover our expenses and all the stuff we do. So please do that. And, you know, I guess as we go into the summer, I say this and it's very funny because the weather seems to be getting colder. I don't know if we're moving towards spring. I kind of feel like spring's coming. And then the next thing I know, I looked out the window yesterday and there was snow on the ground, I'm so like used to winter now. I didn't even strike me as unusual until about 5 seconds later. I'm like, wait a minute. It was like 65 degrees the other day and now there's snow out there. I don't know. Maybe you guys don't get as much snow on the other side of the state, but it's been a weird spring.
Yeah, no, for sure. It has. And, you know, we had that burst of really warm weather earlier in April, and it's been a little colder recently.
It's just,
I just want that bit done with. And I think we're finally about ready to turn the corner. Let's hope.
I remember my son's in the golf team, his coach said, this is the best opening week ever in high school spring sports. And that was like 80 degrees on a Saturday. It was so hot. I was looking for shade. And then 2 days later, it's snowing, and it really hasn't recovered. I know what's going to happen is it's going to go straight to 90-degree weather and humid. Just we can go straight to summer. But let's talk about. Okay, so we're recording this April 26th, and of course the transfer portal window ends on May 11th, and so the opportunity to leave teams or join teams. Well, not join, but I guess leave teams is leave teams is on May 11th, where you can get out of your position on your scholarship position or whatever. Now, the other thing, of course, is that you can enter the draft, the NBA draft, or you can enter the NBA draft, but while maintaining your college eligibility. And that's what a lot of players have done. I mean, Aaron Henry's the most recent one that I can think of for Michigan State previous years, where you basically go and they tell you it's a way of getting a free evaluation, essentially, what you need to work on, what your chances are of getting drafted either first, second round. And I think it mainly is just a way for people to know where their deficiencies lie and what they need to do to improve their draft stock. And we've had the news, of course, that Michigan State's roster has been pretty steady. I mean, we've had once Hall and Walker joined, there hasn't been much rumors of people leaving or going anywhere. And as far as we know, it's set, except, of course, Akins announced that he is going to look at the draft and get the evaluation while maintaining his college eligibility. And now, just a day or two ago, AJ Hoggard said the same thing. So I guess, for those of us who are watching this, and I mean, is there reason to panic? Is this something we expected? What is your take on what's going on with Akins and Hoggard? And I think probably just take them one at a time, because I think their probably situations are different.
Largely expected for both. I mean, Akins, there was much more reason to be concerned, I think, about the portal than there was him submitting to the draft to get evaluated. And we're seemingly past that. So
right.
For him, it's down to, it appears technically that's not true until May 11th, but all indications are it's MSU or the NBA. And honestly, I think it's unlikely unless he would opt to turn pro, unless he's just hell bent. And I don't get that sense that he's hell bent on leaving. And I don't think that even the people around him who had questions about the wisdom of his remaining at MSU, I don't think there's a feeling that he's ready. In fact, what that primarily seemed to be about was they were concerned that he wouldn't get the opportunity to do the things they think he needs to do to give himself better odds of becoming a pro. And that means primarily playing with the ball in his hands more. And my understanding is Michigan State has laid out a plan, not just with him, but with all their guards, as to how they'll be used next year, what the intention is. And the intention is to have a much more equitable distribution of time with the ball in their hands, and particularly that's between Walker and Akins. Hoggard's going to have the ball in his hands a lot because he is the point guard among the three.
Distributor, yeah.
But the other two guys will have the ball in their hands a lot. Jaden would have, by all accounts, had that opportunity last year, but for the injuries that he suffered, because that put some very important time that they could have worked with him, get him better prepared to play that kind of role, that put that on ice. And so if you remember, a good portion of play up until Big Ten conference play started back up in the beginning of January with him was really about either recovering from injury, so missing games, or working himself back into the flow, which just meant being able to be a productive player, not necessarily in all the ways that they anticipated he might be in the preseason, And he had, of course, missed all that time leading into the season, several weeks, about 6 weeks, I think, maybe more.
Yeah.
So that's what I would expect will happen. Look, you never say never. Weird things could happen. Somebody could fall in love with him in the evaluation process, or multiple somebodies, and all of a sudden he starts hearing, yeah, you're a lock to be drafted. Right now, I don't think there's a strong likelihood that he would be drafted, because he hasn't done that yet. And what I just talked about, with the ball in his hands a lot. And at his size, he's listed as 6'4", he's probably more like 6'3". It's not impossible, but it's tough to have the kind of career you want to have if you haven't demonstrated, or you don't have that ability to play with the ball in your hands a lot. to at least have that capability in the NBA. People could talk about a 3-and-D, but most 3-and-D guys are a little bigger than Jaden is. Now, Jaden's a great athlete, means he could play up a little bit, but I still think the likely outcome there is that he comes back. That's the betting right now, from people I've talked to who know stuff. Hoggard just kind of came out of the blue yesterday, which was Tuesday. Mm-hmm. The deadline was Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So nobody even knew he'd submitted until
because when did the list come out? Because that's
the
where
list came out yesterday.
Out from, right?
The list came out yesterday, right? But the deadline, because he didn't even do one of those, graphics until today, until Wednesday. Right. To me, that is telling. That tells you this is not a guy who's thinking it right now is, well, I'm probably gone, so I'd better get my, you guys are great, see you later speech out of the way. I just don't. Yeah. And with AJ, I think we all know, well, what is the weakness? Well, right now you would say primarily it's shooting, but I think there are other things too, displaying that game in, game out consistency. He was the best he's ever been this year, that's for sure. But there was still points in the season where AJ showed inconsistency, and that's something he's got to get over that hump too. So I suspect with both of these guys, this is a level check. This is going through the process, getting feedback as to where they stand, what they need to improve on. MSU has seen guys do this many times. You mentioned Aaron Henry was a recent example. I mean, you can go back to guys like Adrian Payne did it. I think Nick Ward did it. I mean, they've had guys do this. So it's not unheard of. It's not unusual. I don't think, to answer your question, I don't think panic or even grave concern is warranted. Yeah, things can happen. As I say, it only takes one to really fall in love with a player and communicate that, and that could change perceptions. But for right now, I don't think, and we're basically talking about a month-long process. I can't remember the exact date in May, but it's at the end of May. They have to make their decision whether they're in or out. So it's not going to go on.
The draft is after the playoffs, right? So
the draft itself is after the playoffs. The lottery deal comes up sooner. That comes up in the midst of the playoffs. I think it's during the conference finals, maybe.
That sounds about right.
But the decision to be in or out is at the end of May. So it's not going to go on forever. And honestly, there haven't been too many times. I'm trying to think where it's been surprising, the outcome. Marcus Taylor was surprising, but that wasn't you didn't have these kind of, you can go in the draft and get evaluated.
Right. You had to pick.
Yeah. Since that rule has been instituted, I can't think of any, and there's a first time for everything, but I can't think of a situation where that happened, because the fact of the matter is, and we talked about it here, when Max Christie went in last year, even though he had, opted to preserve his eligibility initially, he was gone.
Yeah.
That was understood by people who knew. That was understood. We talked about that pretty openly here. So if the standard operating procedure is in place in terms of what's the quality of the intel that's out there and what's likely to happen, there's not a lot to worry about.
Yeah. I mean, I look at the situation with these two players, and it's different because I feel like with AJ, he just needs to hear probably what the coaching staff has been telling him for the last year, right, certainly, but maybe even the last 2 years. He needs to hear from another source and someone more authoritative, that they have the same concerns. Because I think that's what happened with Aaron Henry and certainly Nick Ward, right? That they heard and they sort of were able to focus a little bit better, I think, in their game. But I feel with Akins, maybe even for him, he might see it too as somewhat of, I need to have the scouts say, you need to exhibit skills X, Y, Z, and we think generally it's going to be how he's handling the ball, so he could play like a lead guard or something, right, in the NBA. And then he can take that back to the staff and said, this is what your plan was, just to make sure that this is what I absolutely have to do. But I mean, I think to your point, I think probably this coaching staff has the same idea as what he needs to do, and that they have probably a plan for him to be able to exhibit those skills.
There is. I'm not guessing. I'm not guessing about that.
Right.
I'm not guessing about that. That what I mentioned about Akins and Walker and how everybody's been told before Walker decided, made public, let's put it that way, his intention to return, that was put out there to everybody. They all understood this is the intention.
So do you think it's just then maybe for Jaden, I'm assuming he doesn't find someone who just falls in love with his athleticism, et cetera, that it's going to be make sure there's nothing else that he's not thought about.
Yeah. And that it's always, Izzo talked about, that's the thing. Izzo's not surprised. He mentioned this, 2 weeks ago. And he said he wouldn't be surprised if Jaden and AJ both put their names in. He mentioned those guys specifically. So he wasn't caught surprised, by this, but I think it's just, as Izzo put it, it seems to be the cool thing to do. I forget the final numbers, like 230, 240 kids put their name in the draft.
Yeah. It's going to be
That's
a big
lot. It's a lot, when whatever it is, 60 guys get taken. It's, I think that some of that is about posturing, and you're doing that maybe for your own self-confidence or to send messages to the world at large that, hey, I'm a guy who's capable of being a pro, even if I don't go. I think some of it's that. And some of it is really, well, it would be a good thing to get evaluated by other people and get that, get that under my belt and use that where if I come back to college to work on my game. I mean, the only concern you ever have in these scenarios, in my mind, is if a guy comes back, is he coming back for the right reasons? So like when Nick Ward went and got evaluated before his junior year, my one concern was, okay, we know that he's going to be told, look, you got to get better. You got to get better condition. You got to be better away from the rim defensively, all of that. But we knew he'd also get some word about, well, you're basically just a low post big guy, and we don't really use those very much anymore. So you got to show some game away from the basket and ability to hit at least a mid-range jumper, if not the deep shot. And I wondered, well, is he going to come back and he's going to want to start playing more on the perimeter? And will that be a problem for MSU? There have been instances of this where guys gone through the process, they come back and their mindset isn't in the right spot for their team success. I'm not worried about it with either of these guys, because what they're likely to hear is going to be, as you said, it's just going to be reinforcing stuff that they've already heard and that they already know from their time at Michigan State, what they have to do. So, and the other thing, that the other sign that's really, really good here, which again, I will contrast with Max Christie, Akins and Hoggard have both been fully engaged, my understanding, in all off-season activity with the team. So team meetings, workouts, all that kind of stuff, they've been right in it.
Yeah. So
that's usually a pretty good indicator. Max Christie got the hell out of Dodge quick after the end of the season. Didn't even, and again, I don't want to dredge this stuff up again, but my understanding from multiple people, so I'm as certain as I can be without having been there to witness it myself that it happened, he didn't even do his exit interview.
Yeah.
So that's why I was not surprised. I was more surprised in his situation that his announcement said, well, he's going to retain the ability to come back, retain his eligibility for next season, because I thought, well, he's already decided. I don't even know why he's bothering with that.
Yeah.
This is a very different situation with both these guys. So again, I don't think there's reason to be panicked. Anything can happen. I'm not saying anything's 100% locked, but I feel pretty good about the likelihood both of them are going to be back.
Yeah. And you figure today's age now with the NIL that now nothing's published as far as what the revenue, contracts are for these players, how much money they're getting from their sponsorships, et cetera.
No, it's not subject to FOIA.
Right. Yeah. And there's no reason we would know unless they publicly would state, and it's unlikely they would do something like that. And people some people I'm sure know, but well, obviously they do. But you have to imagine that if you're making the decision, it just adds another layer of like, well, if you're leaving just for money, like if you don't like school, you may just leave. Like I think Marcus Bingham, not that he didn't like school, but I think he was ready to be done with college. That's sort of like the every sort of word you got from him. But like, unless you really don't like your team, don't like being where you are, if you're just being pulled away by money, well, now I think that money is I don't know what it is in the G League, but it's probably not, amazing to the point where you can't get somewhere close to that. And in some ways, your exposure is way better in college than it's ever going to be in the G League. So if you're going to, make a name for yourself somewhere, you're definitely going to get potentially much better sponsorships, even going into your NBA career, if you do really well in college.
NIL has, the long and the short of it is NIL has really changed the equation for a lot of these guys. How the money compares is tough because, as you say, we don't know all the details of everybody's NIL situation. Suffice it to say, Michigan State's guys are, in a national sense, very well taken care of.
Right, exactly.
It is also very difficult to assess because are you signed to a two-way deal? Do you have guaranteed money? What is that? It's complicated. So, yeah. But I think the long and the short of it is NIL has made it at major schools like Michigan State, at least, has made it so that guys coming back it's not a comparison between, well, I'm making nothing or I get my pro career started. And even if I'm in the G League all year, at least I'm making something.
Right.
It's now very, very competitive at the least. And in many situations, particularly if you put your name in a draft and you don't get drafted, you're in a situation where you're probably doing actually better financially with an NIL deal at a place like Michigan State, at least.
Sure, because you can't imagine guys in the G League are getting much for, sponsorships or any sort of, contracts from companies.
I just mean dollar to dollar. Take their contract,
right,
versus all the money that you're getting through NIL.
Right. I mean, I guess that's my point, that, the G League, you're pretty much making your contract. I don't think you're probably making much beyond that.
Correct.
Maybe you have a deal with some like car dealership in town where but probably not. I mean,
right.
I don't even know. I have no idea who's on the team here in Grand Rapids, for instance. Now, I don't know if this is like one of the top teams. I don't even have any clue, but I know not many people go to the games. And I think, you're just kind of it's a farm league, to get into. It's much like who's on the minor league baseball team. You really don't know unless you're a true insider. One of the things with Akins too, is the player he was last summer before he got hurt and had to have surgery at Moneyball. I mean, there was no question that he was the best player at Moneyball. I mean, when you talk to people who watched, I watched him a little bit, but I kind of got late to the one day I happened to get there, but he just was so smooth and could attack the basket. He just seemed like head and shoulders athletically and just more gifted and just so much better than everyone. And we never really saw that last year. I thought maybe you kind of started seeing it near the end of the last like couple weeks of the season, but really until the very end, like maybe the last game or so of the regular season, Big Ten tournament, and then which was short-lived, one game, and then the NCAA tournament, you started kind of seeing that and started seeing what he was doing and what people were reporting on him doing in the Moneyball. Now, Moneyball is, of course, Moneyball, so you can only take so much from that, but those skills are certain you can highlight there. And I would say, Pierre Brooks was talked about a lot during Moneyball, but I remember watching him and thinking he just seemed like a high volume shooter, and that's why he was scoring a lot of points, but it wasn't like he was like, shooting 70% or something like that. He just shot a ton, but Akins was like, again, just looked a lot better. And I feel like his ability, I think we're going to see a different Akins this next season than we saw last season, assuming he stays healthy. And I think he has to, my guess is it'd probably be better for him in almost every situation to stay at Michigan State and try and develop those skills than to try and go to the G League, where I think he could still develop the same things, but I think he'll probably be in a better spot from a draft standpoint and, the big contracts and stuff if he sticks in the college game. Don't you think?
Yeah, I do. That's my personal opinion, though, which doesn't matter very much.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, he's look. I think that Jaden Akins has a chance next year if he has a healthy offseason. Jaden Akins, I think, could be the best player on Michigan State's team. Is a guy who's capable of being the player of the year in the Big Ten. I mean, that sounds like a lot for a guy who hasn't yet averaged double digits, but I think it's true.
Mm-hmm.
I expected him to have a similar kind of sophomore year leap that guys the year before had, like Jaden Ivey, Murray,
right,
Davis.
Yeah.
It didn't quite happen because, in large part, because he was hurt. But I think that may just be 1 year delayed. I mean, for as good as Tyson Walker and AJ Hoggard are, and they're great, Jaden Akins is the guy with the most upside. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, in some ways, Michigan State might have been lucky that he got hurt. Like, if you look at it, they may have got an extra year out of the guy and and get an even better year.
The other way you can look at it is if he was better this year, they might have had a better season, and they were pretty close to being a Final Four caliber team anyway.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, I guess.
But for next year,
definitely
a positive.
So let's break just briefly here for our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
So you open Google Chrome on your phone, you're hunting for a super rare first edition vinyl of a band you're obsessed with, when you're supposed to be working. But this site you tapped on seems pretty shady. And Daryl from IT just jumped up from his desk. Oh no, he's coming your way. It's a good thing built-in malware protection keeps you safe and sound. Not from Daryl though, sorry. There's no place like Chrome. Download Google Chrome on your phone.
It's easy to grow more vibrant plants. Just feed them with Miracle Grow Shake and Feed. Shake a little around your plants once every 3 months and you're good. That's all you need to know. Not even sure what to talk about for the rest of this commercial. I guess I could list off my favourite plants. The weeping fig, honeysuckles, any kind of fern, I'm a sucker for a fern. Spider plants, roses, classic. Oh wait, I forgot to have to say the slogan too. Miracle Grow, all you need to know to grow.
So just a reminder, if you need Spartan apparel, you can get 20% off at Nudge Printing. They have high quality screen printing, t-shirts, sweatshirts, not only Michigan State stuff, but other schools in the state of Michigan and also some other random schools around the country. You can check them out at nudgeprinting.com. You will not go wrong. I have a number of their, I've got some shirts, I got a sweatshirt. All my family, actually, we all have t-shirts. Everyone loves them and they wear them all the time. We wash them a ton. And they are just as nice, and the printing is perfect on it still. So it holds up really well in the wash. Again, you can't go wrong with their products. At nudgeprinting.com, Final Four, for the coupon code, you get 20% off. Gabe and Brittany, who own the company, are Michigan State alums, and they will do things right. Also, we're mentioning spring, it really is. It's raining and stuff. So if you do need gutter work done in the west side of the state of Michigan, make sure you talk to the brothers at Just Do Gutters. Talk to Kurt Stauffer and his team. They do excellent work repairing, replacing, and cleaning your gutters. They can work at any time. They're fully insured. They get work done quickly, and they have all kinds of selection as far as different colors and things like that. If you have, you want brown or you want black or you want white gutters, whatever you want, they got it all, and they will take care of you real quick. You get 10% off if you email Kurt and you say Final Four. So it's kurt.stauffer at brothersgutters.com. That's all they do is just gutters. So they don't mess around doing other things. They just specialize in just that thing. All right. So the other thing is, we talked after the Jesse McCulloch was the second commitment for the 2024 class from Michigan State. And the questions we get on either on our website or elsewhere is, hey, who's next? and your answer even in the episode was, well, we'll know when we see what Izzo and the coaches, who they start, following around and who they start watching this summer in the AU circuit. So why don't you give us a little, update or preview of what's going on in 2024 and I suppose even a little bit maybe 2025.
Well, last weekend was it was the start of the real start of the AAU season. There were a couple of regional tournaments the weekend prior, but last weekend was when the shoe company circuits had their first weekend of play. So EYBL for Nike, 3SSB for Adidas, and I can't recall what Under Armour calls their thing, but I don't think Michigan State is currently known to be recruiting anybody on an Under Armour team anyway. So we're okay not knowing that one. So the coaches were out in full force. And yeah, what we talked about was pay attention to who Michigan State is watching. That's going to be your best tell as to who they're interested in. And with 2 recruits already, committed in Jesse McCulloch and of course Kurt Tang, who came before him, Michigan State's in a really nice position. Nobody knows how many guys they actually intend to sign. My gut would be probably another couple, so another 4-man class. That's my guess, but that's all it is a guess. And positionally, who knows? I mean, there's lots of you can make arguments for pretty much any position on the floor, theoretically.
Sure. Yeah.
And never mind 25s. I mean, you have no shot at figuring out where the quote unquote need would be. So I just wanted to go over some of what we've learned. Now, was not able to see anything of the Adidas circuit, and MSU actually is involved with a few Adidas kids, more so maybe than they are normally. I was able to see some stuff from EYBL, and it's interesting. Adidas has some work to do because with EYBL, with Nike's event, they have live streaming, so you could see every game, and they've been doing that for a few years, but they've actually at least the first weekend, it was much improved in terms of what I recall about previous years, in terms of the quality of the camera work, the angles you're getting. It's just one camera, but it's pretty good. The games I watched, you're able to follow what was going along. You're able to identify who's who if you know the numbers. And that's the thing. EYBL also does a very good job of keeping stats current. You get statistical reports after the games are completed, and they've got running totals, what guys are averaging. And they have rosters with roster numbers. They also have them for the 15s and the 16s as well, which is really, really helpful. So they do it the right way. Adidas is not doing that. Adidas has a video option that's a subscription fee, which, I mean, come on. and the statistics are not published. And I raise this because Kurt Tang, already committed to MSU, plays for an Adidas team out of Massachusetts, Mass Rivals. And he apparently had a very, very good weekend. I know he had 20 points in a win over Indiana Elite in their first game. And then there was a game later in the weekend where he apparently scored 20 points in a half. But I can't tell you what the average was for the weekend or what he shot. And that the highlights look good. I saw some highlights, and his team went 3-1. So those are all good indicators, along with the anecdotal stuff about the point totals in those 2 games. But I can't give you any more detail. In that first game I mentioned, they played Indiana Elite, and Indiana Elite's big name is Flory Badenga, who is a 2024 big man out of Kokomo, Indiana. Big time prospect, like a top 5 guy nationally. Everybody is trying in on him or trying to get in on him. Tom Izzo was at that game. So he was at that game Friday night for the Adidas event, and then he went to Nike for the rest of the weekend, I believe. But he was there for that one. And then I think they had an assistant there for the rest of it. And, again, I couldn't get stats on Badinga, but you don't need stats to know what kind of player he is. So indication is Michigan State still very much intends to be in the mix with Flory Badinga. So that's the conclusion we draw from that. Switching over to Nike, many, many more guys that are firmly on the radar at Nike. Tops among them, of course, Jesse McCulloch, who committed, as you said, just last week. 6'9", 4 or 5. He's playing 5 in AAU at Michigan State. I expect him to be more of a 4, playing for for Spice Indy Heat. And I saw one entire game he played against the Family, the team out of Detroit, and he was solid. Had 8 points in the game, was a solid rebounder, was a defensive presence. He had a game in this they played 4 games over the weekend. He had another game over the weekend where he blocked 4 shots in a game. And when you see him, you see the length. The things that I was most impressed by, though, I think with him, were 2 plays that came late in that game against the Family. One was where he backed down his defender, made a really nice low post half hook shot for a bucket. Because we had questions about that. Like, well, how does he play? And his reputation is mostly as a shooter. He had another game in the tournament where he went 3 for 4 from 3. So he showed off some of that deep shooting ability not over the tournament rather, but over the 4 games that they played. But that was him showing a post move. So I liked seeing that. And I think I had mentioned when we talked about him last week that I felt as if he had a little more in the way of a developed post game and an intent to play in the post than, say, Xavier Booker has shown to this point. That's one way maybe they separate a little bit. The other play, which was really encouraging from a Michigan State perspective, I think, was he ran a pick and roll with a kid named Jalen Harrelson, who I'll talk about more in a minute, who's a top 10 recruit in 2025 that MSU is interested in. And off the pick and roll, Harrelson really led him to the rim, and it ended up as a catch and a dunk off the pick and roll. But what was impressive about it to me were the hands that McCulloch showed, because it was not an easy pass to corral, and it went through a little bit of traffic, and that he was able to make that all come off, and good body control as well. It was impressive. So the game I happened to witness, I don't even think he attempted a 3. They weren't really using him as a pick and pop option, but he has that in his game. So those were the positives that I saw with him. 2 teammates he has that are interesting from an MSU perspective. I mentioned Jalen Harrelson, top 10 guy nationally in 2025, 6'7", and he's already got a Big Ten body. You could put him on a Big Ten court tomorrow and he wouldn't look out of place physically. And he's a guard. He fancies himself as a point guard. He was not great in the game I saw, and that's no big deal. Those things happen. And he's also playing up a year. So I take all that into consideration, but I'm just noting that the game I happen to see, Harrelson was not dominant by any means, but yet you can see why he's ranked the way where he is. You can see it. I mean, physically, visually, when you're watching him, he stands out. It doesn't take a genius to spot that guy and say, oh, I bet that guy must be pretty good. He moves well. He's fluid. He's strong for a guard. He just didn't have his shot dialed in that game, and wasn't really imposing himself. But on the other hand, he also didn't go crazy, which sometimes you do see, especially when guys are struggling. They go overboard in trying to find ways to make things happen, and they press, take a lot of shots, a lot of bad shots. He didn't do that. So that was impressive. The 2025 who was really impressive for Indy Elite in that game was a kid named Trent Sisley, who, or Sisley, I'm not sure what it's Sisley, who's a 6'8", stretch 4 type, also from Indiana. And Michigan State has been on him for a while too. He's got an offer. He's a top, you see him top 40, top 50. He was really good in this game. Hit a couple threes, fluid for a guy. Sometimes you see those pick and pop 4 types, the bigger ones, and they're not necessarily fluid athletes, or at least not yet. This guy can move. He carries himself and moves very, very well. He's also tough. And again, he's another guy who's physically looks the part already, even though he's still probably for another month or so a high school sophomore. And he plays with a great motor. I mean, in this game, he was active. He was everywhere. So I was really impressed by him. he's another kid like Harrelson. Indiana and Purdue are all over him. Other schools are involved too. It's not a recruitment where I could say at this point, oh yeah, Michigan State's got an edge, but I think they're going to be in it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So those were the guys for Indy Heat. And again, I saw the whole game, but I haven't even gotten to the main event, because the main event was a guy for the other team who doesn't yet have a Michigan State offer, and I can't understand why. And that is Darius Acuff. Darius Acuff is a let's call him 6'2" point guard from Detroit Cass Tech. He just got done this spring as a sophomore leading Cass Tech to, I can't remember whether, I don't think it's the first state title in school history. I think it's the first one in like 70 years though. Something like that. But he led them in any event to a state title and was really impressive in doing it. Some listeners may know in the semifinal at Breslin, he hit a half-court shot against, I think it was against Muskegon, to send the game into overtime, which they then won. So they were one missed half-court shot away from not winning the state title, not even getting to that game. He hit it. He was dynamite. He was the main guy all year long for them. And he's playing up. And yet, I had said this, I don't know, I don't think I said it here, but I definitely said it on the Spartan Mag board. Michigan offered him a couple weeks ago. And that was surprising to me, because Tom Izzo has, over the course of his tenure at Michigan State, he has made a habit of getting in early and getting in first on in-state guys. And I felt, and that's true, Beeline was there before Beeline, since Howard's been there, it's remained true. And it just struck me as strange, because with the season Acuff had, I thought, boy, this guy, I hadn't seen him play yet. But I thought, just from what I was hearing and seeing, like, this guy seems to have done enough. And now you got Michigan beating MSU to the punch. That's unusual. He had an unreal weekend, unreal. And it was capped. The best game is the one I happen to see. So in a very close victory by the family in that game, he scored 25 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 blocks, and was ultra efficient. He was just under 50% from 3 on pretty high volume for the weekend in 4 games. And I think he was around 60% from the floor, which is crazy. He is the real thing in that game. And I'm not saying he's the best prospect in that game. That will remain to be seen. But in that game, as it was played, he was the best player on the floor, and it wasn't even close. And I just reeled off some guys that are top 10 in their class, top 50. Forget it. Darius Acuff was the best player in that game by a landslide. Great handle, great court vision and ability to pass. He made one pass in transition that was so quick, I wasn't even sure that I actually saw it for a second, if you get my drift. Great handle, great court vision, great passer. Very, very efficient finisher. He was going against Indy Heat, has some real size, and he was finishing consistently against it at the rim. And he's got a mentality to attack. And then, as I mentioned, he was just under 50% from 3, so he can shoot. So there's just nothing really lacking. So I watched this, and I know Michigan State saw that game because I could see Izzo and Kelly there with the cameras on the under the basket on the baseline where the coaches hide out. I could see them there, at least for part of it. And I thought, well, after this weekend, they got to offer. They haven't offered him yet. But you know who did? Kentucky. Also Nebraska and Pittsburgh. But I'll say it again. Kentucky offered him. Michigan's offered him. Michigan State has not as of yet. And I don't understand why. I haven't gone and talked to people I know who might have an answer to that. But it is a mystery to me. I will put it that way, because right now, based on what he's already done in his high school career at Cass Tech, what he did this weekend in totality, playing up a year too, I'll add. He's playing up a level and doing this. And what I witnessed in that game, I feel pretty comfortable saying he's the best point guard produced in this state since Cassius Winston.
Wow.
Now, there's not a lot of guys, who are we talking about? Well, Foster Lawyer, David DeJulius. If you want to call Rocket Watts a point guard, I guess. There's not like, it's not like I'm saying, well, he's better than 3 NBA guys. But still,
right.
We're talking about going back to 2016. And I would right now, subject to revision, but right now, based on all the information at hand and what I witnessed with my own eyes, he's the best, and it's not close.
Interesting. You almost wonder if there's something else in the family or some other thing that's going on that's precluding Michigan State from being a part of it. Yeah. That
occurs to me. I do know that a guy named Rashad Phillips, who is an all-time great at University of Detroit, and he's an active Twitter account. He's been a trainer for a long time. He doesn't live in Michigan anymore. He lives in Florida, but he is related to Acuff. And especially after this weekend, he's been very active on Twitter and talking about how this is something he and the rest of the family have planned for and been working toward, and all of that. I don't think Rashad Phillips is a negative for MSU from what I know. It's certainly not a situation where you see his name associated with a kid. Yeah, that's just not going to go your way. And even when those situations have happened, Michigan State still normally offers.
Sure.
Because you have to play the game. So even if they know they're not going to get a kid, they'll usually do that. So I don't know. I'll admit, I'm absolutely befuddled as to why he doesn't have an offer yet, because it was a spectacular game. It was one of those moments, and sometimes you have them, where you see a guy and you already think they're pretty good, and then they surpass that. And that's what I saw on Sunday afternoon from Darius Acuff.
With the offer process, does it sometimes work where you decide, well, I'm not going to offer until I have a chance to have an opportunity to speak to the recruit, one-on-one or something like that first, rather than just offering after you talk to him briefly as he's, heading to the tunnel or something, into the locker room? Do you think it might be something like that?
Yeah, but Michigan State doesn't have, John Beilein used to, if I remember correctly, used to have this policy where he didn't offer kids until they were at Michigan on at least an unofficial. Okay. He wouldn't offer them. Izzo doesn't have that kind of policy to my knowledge. Possibly something like what you're talking about. That's true. But I will also admit that I'm a little bit concerned. Look, we don't know 1/1000th of what those guys know on various levels. So sure. I trust in what they're doing. But I will say, just looking at it from the outside, I am confused why it hasn't happened. I already felt that way coming into this weekend. But now, Jesus, what else does he have to do? He's clearly going to be one of the best players in that 2025 class nationally. Clearly. Because he was on the same court with a kid who's everybody puts in the top 10. And Darius Acuff was easily the better player on that day. Now, again, he might not be the better prospect in the long run. That's subject to debate. But he was so good that you would not look at it and say, well, no, that's a guy who, maybe he could be a Big Ten player someday if he keeps working at it. No, not at all. I mean, Kentucky offered. Kentucky, I will tell you this, Kentucky, for them to offer a kid who's at the stage he's at, who's just completing his sophomore year of high school, that's a statement. That is a statement, So, yeah, one to watch. Anyway, that's the Darius Acuff stuff. I will also say there's another kid on that team who's had an MSU offer for quite a while. Fat Brooks from your neck of the woods, from Grand Rapids Catholic Central. And it wasn't great. I had heard that he had sort of a disappointing season at Grand Rapids Catholic Central. And that was coming off last spring and summer, where he played for the Family 16s and really had a nice year from everything I had heard. but he had kind of a disappointing year in high school for, again, that's scuttlebutt. I didn't see it. But in this game, you could, there's stuff you can see when you're watching him. Like his handle looks legit. The way he carries himself, you can say, okay, there's a kid that's got some talent, but he just didn't do very much. He just sort of existed. He made one play out of a pick and roll where he used a pick nicely, got himself loose for about an 18-foot jumper, just inside the arc and nailed it. That was nice. But that was really about it. I mean, Acuff has just taken that. Acuff is the alpha. He's the guy with the ball in his hands, not Fat. And so I do tend to wonder if that's going to be one that Michigan State doesn't really end up going the distance in. But that's just a guess. So that was that game. I also watched a half of a game involving all Ohio Red because there's a couple of kids with MSU interest or offers. In fact, one is a 2024 Jonathan Powell, who's a 6'5" wing from the state of Ohio, and Michigan State offered him back in the fall. A lot of people at that time that I was hearing from, there was a sort of a moment where there was a feeling like he might just commit, and he didn't. But there's still, I think there are people who think he might be the best candidate to be the next guy for MSU. I don't know. We'll see. The game I saw was not a great game for him. He had some good defensive moments. And again, I talk about looking the part. One thing you can always see in these games, I think you mentioned it in regard to Moneyball, and it's the same thing in AAU. You could see how a guy's athleticism might play. You could see what they look like physically for the position. And though he checks the boxes in all those areas, he just wasn't very dialed in with his shot. He shot it better later in the weekend. So he ended up having a decent weekend in that regard. It was just the one half of basketball I saw. He wasn't really dialed in, but he's a guy that Michigan State likes a great deal. And then there's another 2025 guy playing up, a point guard from the Toledo area named Jerry Easter. And he's interesting. He's another guy, a bigger point guard, maybe 6'4". He kind of almost reminds me, and it was just something about the way he moved. A thinner AJ Hoggard is kind of what he reminded me of, in a way, in terms of the way his body played. But he was impressive in terms of his ability to handle the ball. He showed some ability to get to the basket finish. I didn't see him really do much in terms of the jumper. My understanding is that's kind of a work in progress. So that might be another Hoggard thing, but definitely a guy. You can understand why Michigan State has offered and has interest in him, because even playing a level up, he didn't look out of place at all. Other guys that are worth talking about real quickly, as we talked about how you're going to have an indication as to who Michigan State's serious about by virtue of who they watch. And we wondered, well, now that they've got Jesse McCulloch, are they going to continue to pursue some of these other guys who might be four-man types, And the two most notable names were Aiden Sherrill, who plays for Vegas Elite, and he is a 6'10", very impressive player, kind of a consistently national top 40 type guy. He's already taken an official to Michigan State, and they watched him. So they're not ruling out Aiden Sherrill. He averaged 14.5 points over the weekend, shot 54, 43, 92. So pretty impressive as a shooter. MSU saw him a couple times, so I would say they're still in it. But the interesting thing is Alabama had been perceived to maybe be out front in that one. And then they lost all their assistants.
Yeah.
So you don't know how that's going to go. Well, Nate Oates, I believe, was at every game he played. So
there you go.
Alabama's still staying in it, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's look, it's hard to say. I wouldn't bet on that one going MSU's way. He's originally from Detroit. So they have that familiarity. And, I think there'd been a lot of there'd been a lot of feeling earlier in the recruitment that it was kind of an Alabama Michigan State thing, but with Michigan State having McCulloch already in the fold, they could kind of they could stay in touch and then continue working it. And if the kid comes around and decides he really wants to be part of things at Michigan State, well, you'll probably find a way to make it work. But it doesn't feel like they really need to go full tilt, but we'll see. Another guy, interesting, Tyler McKinley, 6'9", 4, maybe capable of being, Sherrell is more of a 4, maybe capable of being a 5 in some ways. McKinley, I think, is more of a 4, maybe capable of being a 3. Had a decent weekend for MoKan 17s at EYBL rather. 9 points a game, 6 rebounds a game, was 65% from the floor, only 1 for 3 from deep, but obviously 65% from the floor. You like that number. So those were the big names. There's a couple of other things that are worth noting. Michigan State apparently after the weekend made contact with and expressed some interest in a point guard named Kurt Gibbons, who also plays for MoKan. So they got to see him while watching Tyler McKinley. He had a huge weekend, was one of the leading scorers over the weekend. I think he averaged like almost 19 a game, shot the ball well. Didn't get an offer as of yet. He's originally from Memphis. Remains to be seen if MSU gets serious. One guy I should mention, I almost forgot, I really shouldn't have, who MSU was absolutely locked in on the weekend was Jace Richardson. And Jace Richardson had a nice weekend playing for Paul George Elite. They saw him at least 3 of his 4 games. And he shot very well. I'm looking to see real quickly if I have his scoring numbers over the weekend, and I'm not finding them, but he played very, very well. And the fact that Michigan State was there for all 3 of his games is notable. Very notable. Sure. And then 2 quick 2025 notes. MSU also watched Trey McKinney, who's a kid from Flint, plays for Orchard Lake St. Mary, and he's on Mean Streets, an AAU team out of Chicago. He had a big weekend, and Michigan State did watch him. Trey averaged, 16 points a game, 57% overall, 31% from 3. So why is that notable? He's considered a high-level 2025 recruit, but there's been a lot of reason to think that one won't go MSU's way. Because his father has not been considered to be a pro MSU force. But MSU has had him in for visits. They continue to recruit him. They were recruiting him, watching him here. So you don't write it off. There was an interesting one more 2025 at Nike. Jeremiah Fears, who's Jeremy Fears' younger brother, had played up with Brad Beal 17s this weekend. So again, another guy, a lot of these 25 guys MSU is in on, pretty much all of them are actually playing up a level. He averaged a little over 8 points a game over the weekend. Didn't shoot the ball very well. He was 12 for 33 overall and only 3 for 13 from 3. But, you got to be really careful in trying to take too much or make too much out of stats at EYBL. And that's especially true over one weekend. I've seen enough of Jeremiah Fears to know that the best thing he does is shoot the basketball. So that's one, it remains to be seen where MSU's offered him. He's had an offer for a while. We'll see how that evolves, but they're definitely still in on him. And then interestingly, today, MSU offered a kid named Koa Pete, who is a 6'8", and I mean built. This kid already looks maybe not even just the Big Ten. He looks like maybe he could be in the pros physically. I mean, he is put together, and he's from, if you think you recognize that last name, Peat, you probably do. He comes from a family of athletes, most of whom have been high-level football players. One of them was a guy named Cassius Pete, who came to MSU under Mark D'Antonio, and I think lasted a year, didn't play, and then ended up transferring out. But that's this guy's brother. And Koa Pete is a national top 10 guy in that class. So he plays in Arizona. It'll be interesting to see how that recruitment evolves, but high level talent to be sure. And we'll start to find out over the course of the spring how seriously Michigan State is in that one. But for now, that's definitely a name to add to your list of guys in 25 that they're interested in. But I think in terms of the 24 class, the two things that I would take away as most notable were they're continuing to recruit guys who roughly have similar positional profiles to McCulloch. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't look like his committing has ended the recruiting of those guys. And then the second thing is they were all over Jace Richardson, all over him. And he had a big weekend too. So that tells me that they're very serious about adding an on-ball, or a guy who has the potential at least to be an on-ball guy in this class.
It was interesting. One of our plans this week was to talk to Coach Kelly, to have him back on the show. And he was gone in Phoenix. It sounded like pretty much the entire coaching staff and a lot of Michigan State players.
Yep.
Matt Ishbia, who now is the owner of the Suns, of course, in the playoffs. And there are a ton of former Spartans in that. They had a couple of group pictures and stuff, but
counted 18.
That of course, they make this offer. They're out there seeing Jace Richardson. I mean, it all sort of fits together too. Like they're all out there doing this at once. But we are going to have Kelly on later, just so you know. So for a programming note, we're also going to have Mike DeCourcy on, which is going to be we're pretty excited about. So we're going to be able to talk a little bit of Big Ten basketball and Michigan State, and then of course just the college basketball landscape in general. So really smart guy. So I know I'm looking forward to that quite a bit. And so that's something you can put on your schedule. And, in general, we're going to have a lot of people on this summer. I think we've really ramped up the interviews. You guys have been really supportive of us. So we're going to try and keep the good content. And yeah, it's not basketball season, but I think there are lots of interesting discussions of things going on in college basketball and prep for a season that I think is going to be pretty exciting for Michigan State fans. And if last year's been any sort of indication of what could be, I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic and to be excited about what could be. And probably the most important part is that I will get a seat reassignment. So the heckler behind me will no longer be behind me. So that's probably the biggest breaking news for me. I guess I won't know till the first game if he's truly disappeared, but I can only hope. All right, we'll wrap it up there. And so until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.